On a cloudy Tuesday, when the sky hung over the city like a gray sheet and the air was thick with rain moisture, I bought a used car, without any particular excitement, without anticipation of anything new. I simply did what was necessary. 4 days later, I found an address in its GPS that changed my life. Back then, I didn't yet know it was capable of changing anything, and I didn't even suspect that ordinary things, like a used car bought from a stranger, could have their own story tangled with mine so tightly, as if fate had decided to play a game with incomprehensible rules. The car wasn't anything special, a 2018 Honda Civic with 65,000 miles on the odometer, in decent though slightly worn condition. Silver, with faint scratches on the doors and the smell of a cheap air freshener that couldn't quite mask the scent of someone else's life. A faint trace of someone's coffee, dust, maybe even loneliness. The price was quite acceptable, and I bought it more out of necessity than desire. I wasn't looking for adventure, didn't dream of new roads or changes. I just needed a reliable way to get to the job I hated and back, to my one-bedroom apartment where no one was waiting. But one address was saved in the GPS memory, labeled home. And although I understood it was just a remnant of someone else's life, someone's forgotten trace, I couldn't resist the temptation. Curiosity is a strange force. It whispers quietly, as if from within. What if? And one day, on a Saturday, I entered the coordinates and drove. The road led me out of the city, to where concrete gradually gave way to hills, and the air became fresher, cooler, as if the world itself was beginning to breathe differently. The asphalt climbed higher, and by the time I reached the scenic overlook, the sun was already setting. On an old wooden bench sat a man, gray-haired with a tired face and a kind of unfathomable calm in his eyes. He turned to me and said, as if unsurprised, "You came?" At that moment, a chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but rather from a strange feeling of recognition, as if I really was supposed to be here. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask, have you ever followed your curiosity to a place where you expected nothing special and suddenly found something that changed you from the inside? If yes, you know that feeling, and if not, listen. I was driving to an address that didn't belong to me, but in a way it was calling me. I wasn't geographically lost. I knew the roads, knew my city, knew how to get back home. But inside, I had been lost for a long time. It's that strange state when life seems to be going on as usual, but you feel no meaning in it. When at 3 a.m. you lie with your eyes open, asking yourself, what's it all for? Why does everything around seem so meaningless, as if you're watching a movie about your own life but not participating in it? 2 years ago, I dropped out of graduate school. I had enrolled in a master's program for English literature because I didn't know what else to do. I thought it would give me direction, meaning that by studying words, I would understand myself. But in the middle of the second year, I was sitting in a seminar listening to my classmates discuss deconstructionist theory, and I realized I didn't care. Absolutely didn't care. No passion, no curiosity, not even irritation. Just emptiness, as if I was just attending someone else's lecture. I left. Without hysterics, without drama. I just stopped coming. And for 2 years now, I had been working in a cable company's call center, where my entire day consisted of angry voices on the line, complaints, expectations, repeating phrases. $17 an hour, exactly what the ability to endure is worth. I lived in a cheap apartment with a view of the neighboring building's wall, heated dinners in the microwave, and tried not to think about how life was passing by somewhere else. My college friends were getting married, buying houses, posting photos of children, weddings, vacations in the Maldives, and I was still trying to remember what it was like to be happy about anything. A week ago, my old Corolla died. It had honestly served me for almost 200,000 miles and finally gave up. For a few days, I took the bus, got angry at the rain, the crowds, at myself. Then I decided I just needed to buy something new to somehow keep moving forward. In the used car lot on the outskirts of town, I saw this Honda. The seller, a a man in his 50s, with a face frozen in weariness from endless identical deals, showed me the Carfax, assured me the car was fine, and named a price I could barely afford. He said the previous owner had died. The family sold the car from the estate sale. The paperwork was clean, no accidents. Everything seemed simple, an ordinary purchase. I took a test drive, found the car quite suitable, and signed the papers. 2 days later, I drove off the lot, the owner of a reliable but unremarkable car that could get me from point A to point B without breaking down. And that Friday evening, after another exhausting shift at the call center, I was sitting in my new car in an empty parking lot trying to gather my thoughts and strength to drive home. When, setting up the Bluetooth connection and scrolling through the system menu, I noticed that one address was saved in the GPS, labeled simply Home. And although I immediately thought it was a forgotten trace of the previous owner or his family, some subtle threads of curiosity made me not delete it immediately. The address looked like a rudiment of someone else's life, possibly meaningless, but that evening I had no plans, no meetings with anyone, not even the desire to return to the apartment and cook another dinner for myself alone. So on Saturday morning, out of boredom and with that quiet feeling that following a random impulse might be more interesting than sitting within 4 walls and staring at the ceiling, I decided to follow the specified route. I expected to see a residential neighborhood, maybe a house in an old district, maybe an apartment complex, but the GPS led me away from the city, onto the highway, then turned onto less significant roads, then onto narrower and narrower mountain paths that wound through pine groves and bare rocks. And the further I drove, the more I doubted where I was even going, because this wasn't an area for permanent residents, but state forest lands where people came to camp or hike, not to settle down. The trip took almost 2 hours, and when the navigator finally said dryly, "You have arrived at your destination," I found myself at a scenic overlook, a small indentation in the slope, a wooden fence, a couple of parking spots, and one bench with a view of the valleys and distant mountain ridges, stretching like soft waves of the horizon. On this bench sat an elderly man, probably around 70, with gray hair and a face etched by time and winds. Despite the relatively warm day, he was wearing a flannel jacket and gazing at the panorama with an expression that combined peace and some deep, pressing sadness. I got out of the car slowly, as if an invisible curtain was about to open before me, and when I got closer, he, without getting up, turned his head towards me, looked first at me, then at the car parked behind, and smiled the way people smile when they see that everything is going according to a long-known plan. "You came," he said in a voice rough with time but surprisingly warm. I knew sooner or later someone would do it. I stopped a few steps away, my heart clenched, and bewildered I asked, "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" He shook his head. "No, but I know your car." He pointed to the Civic behind me and said it had belonged to his son, Nestor Mangano, who died 8 months ago, and in that instant, it was as if the air was knocked out of me. The father's words fell on me like a heavy stone, and I felt guilty, though I didn't understand the guilt exactly. I whispered almost inaudibly, "I'm so sorry," because politeness and human compassion called to me, and added uncertainly that I had bought the car from a dealer and knew nothing about its previous history. The old man, sighing, replied so calmly as if he were in a long process of coming to terms with the loss. "It's all right. It was meant to be this way," then introduced himself. "By the way, my name is Alvise Mangano," and his name sounded to me like another seal of fate, because I helplessly pointed at the car, the bench, the panorama around us, and whispered, feeling the words falling from my hands, "I don't know what's happening. I just—" Then, a little faster, to hide the tremor in my voice, I explained that I had found a saved address in the GPS system that seemed strange to me, and which I decided to check because I was curious, and I drove to it. Alvise smiled, though his eyes were full of tears, and in that smile there was something both quiet and piercing, as if sadness itself had suddenly found a reason for a gentle smile. Nestor had hoped for this, he said, because he believed that the world sometimes works in strange ways, and that even the slightest traces can lead the right person to the right place. He said that whoever bought this car, if it was the right person, would be curious enough to follow its path, and if such a person came, he should be here to meet them. Why? I don't understand, I asked, because everything happening seemed both touching and incomprehensible. Then he waved his hand as if inviting the turmoil of my thoughts to settle. "Sit," said Alves, patting the bench beside him. "Let me tell you about my son." I sat, still confused, and he began to speak, slowly, with that unexpected calm of people who recount a loss again and again so it doesn't fester in silence. Nestor was 32 when he died. The cancer started in his lungs, though he never smoked a day in his life. And by the time the disease was discovered, it was already too aggressive and had spread through his body, taking away any hope for a long fight. He fought for almost a year, but his strength waned, Alves's voice tightened, and in the end, he lost. "I'm so sorry," I said, because words of regret are what we have in reserve in response to someone else's pain, and although I never knew Nestor, this grief touched me with its unusual, almost invisible edge. Alves continued, and his speech, as if bursting forth, formed a detailed picture. Nestor was an adventure photographer. He loved capturing the world in frames, collecting the places they had been together like rare stamps of memory, and his childhood had lost its mother early. He was 12 when she left, and since then it was just the two of them. Between father and son, a deep friendship had formed, more of a union of two human hearts than a simple familial bond. He pointed to the view below. This was their place. They first stopped here when Nestor was 14, and a random stop on the road turned into a permanent vow. They came here after graduations, after college. They came here when life got hard, and they would just sit, listen to the silence, and let the sunset heal their vulnerabilities. It was here they scattered his mother's ashes. It was here the small rituals that held them together were strengthened. He wiped away tears, and I felt something within me tremble too. Although I didn't know Nestor personally, his story touched that part of me that understood loss as something universal and painful. When the illness arrived in full force, both of them, father and son, understood the gravity of the sentence. The cancer was too aggressive. Nestor's final months deprived him of even the strength to get out of bed, and the dream of seeing the sunset at the overlook one more time became an almost impossible luxury. I listened, and in my inner world, a scene I had never witnessed arose, but felt with all my skin. Nestor crying in the night silence, asking for something simple and eternal, for a sunset, for a return home. And then he told his father something strange and touching in conversation. A few weeks before his death, he asked to program one address into the car and mark it with the word home, as a small act of faith, not in technology, but in people. Because, he said, whoever buys the car, if they are attentive and curious, might notice this address and heed its call. Alves looked at me with such intensity that I felt awkward, the look of someone speaking who hopes what is heard won't be blasphemously dismissed. Nestor believed the universe connects people not by chance, that there are no meaningless connections between us, and he asked his father, "Dad, whoever buys this car and comes to us is searching for something, even if they don't know what. Be there for them. Tell them our story. Complete my journey. Let someone else see our sunset." I sat stunned, and it seemed to me that the dying man had left a digital mark not as a whim, but as a trust for continuation, an invitation for strangers' souls to complete the unfinished. "I've come here every Saturday since Nestor died," Alves said quietly. "I wait, and in that one word was everything, a promise, a duty, memory, and hope. Most Saturdays no one comes, but I keep coming because I promised him. And today you came. he added, and I saw his face light up with a faint smile where sorrow and gratitude mixed in one attentive gesture. I had almost deleted the address. I thought it was just left in the system by mistake, a forgotten digital imprint of someone's life. But instead of erasing the trace, I followed it, guided by an empty way out of the apartment and a slight impulse of curiosity that seemed to me at the time far more useful than endlessly scrolling through news or cooking dinner for one. I came here not for some grand meaning, but to break the habitual cycle for a minute. And now, standing opposite this man and listening to his words, I understood that my small act had become part of someone's big request. I thought it was just left by mistake, but you didn't delete it. You followed it. Why? I pondered his question, and the words didn't come immediately, as if somewhere deep in my soul I was afraid to voice the simple truth that was just waiting to be acknowledged. I don't know, I said finally, looking into the distance, where clouds clung lazily to the peaks. Curiosity, I guess, or just boredom. I had nothing else to do today. Alvis smiled quietly, but there was no mockery or judgment in his smile. That's enough, he said with a kind of soft certainty, as if drawing an invisible line. Exactly enough. Nestor knew that whoever is capable of following curiosity, even the most insignificant, seemingly meaningless curiosity, is a person worth hearing. He fell silent, and I felt a light breeze touch the ends of my hair, as if nature itself was affirming his words. We sat in silence for a while, looking at the endless panorama of mountains and valleys where the air seemed cleaner than thoughts. And finally, Alvis asked, more quietly, almost like a father addressing a child, "Why were you so bored that you decided to drive to a random GPS address on a Saturday?" I laughed shortly, with the bitterness that arises when laughter is the only way not to cry. "Because my life is empty," I replied. "I'm 26. I work in a call center I hate. Talk to angry people all day and feel like everything around me is moving while I'm stuck. I dropped out of graduate school because I saw no point, and now I just exist. I don't live. No direction, no purpose, no idea what's next." Alvis listened calmly, without pity, just nodding, like a man who had seen such souls before. "You're lost," he said finally. I nodded. "Yes, I suppose so." He was silent for a moment and added, "Nestor was the same when he was in his early 20s. He graduated from college with a business degree because it seemed practical, got a job at an insurance company because it looked responsible, and he was unhappy, completely, utterly unhappy." I turned to him. "And what changed?" I asked. "He took a photography course just for fun," Alvis replied. "He always liked taking pictures with his phone. And then, suddenly, something clicked. He realized he was living someone else's life, not his own. That all that time he had been following others' expectations, not what called to him from within. And then he quit his job, bought a camera, a backpack, and set off to travel. His photos got noticed. People started inviting him to shoot, to buy his pictures. And the next 10 years he lived in a way most people don't live even in 80. I was silent, looking at the horizon where the sky was beginning to fill with evening light. Alvis turned to me. "You came here without any logical reason, right? Just because you were curious. You drove 2 hours to a place you'd never been to see what home meant to someone else. That's not the act of someone completely empty. That's the act of someone who is searching." I smirked, not knowing what to say. "Searching for what?" I asked quietly. "That's the question," he replied. "Nestor didn't know he was searching for photography until he found it. Perhaps you won't know what you're searching for until you stumble upon it. But it's important that you're still curious, still following an inner impulse. And that, is the whole difference between existing and living." We talked for a long time, and I caught myself losing track of time. Alvis told me stories about Nestor, how he photographed the night sky in the desert, how he once got stuck in a mountain gorge and spent 3 days there waiting for help, but then said, those were the happiest days of his life, because he felt for the first time how small and yet how great human life is. He spoke of his belief that a person is made not for survival, but for exploration, that curiosity is not a whim, but an instinct of the soul. And I, in turn, told him about myself, about sleepless nights lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking I was wasting time while others moved forward, got married, built, started companies, became someone, while I still couldn't figure out who to be. When the sun began to set, painting the horizon in deep shades of amber and pink, Alves said quietly, "Nestor loved this time. The light, how everything around seems to start shining from within." We sat in silence, watching the sunset, a 26-year-old lost woman and a 73-year-old grieving father, two completely different lives connected by a dead man's belief that curiosity can connect worlds. When the last ray disappeared behind the mountains, Alves slowly reached into the pocket of his flannel jacket and pulled out a small envelope, neatly folded, yellowed with time. His fingers trembled. "Nestor left this for me," he said. "He said I should give this envelope to whoever came because of the GPS. He wrote it in the last weeks of his life, when he was too weak to do anything else." With trembling hands, I took the envelope, as if afraid that touch might break the fragile thread connecting the living and the departed. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, with a soft smell of time and dust that always evokes awe in me, the smell of someone else's memory, someone else's fate. I opened it carefully, as if I could wound someone's words, and unfolded a sheet covered in uneven, shaky handwriting. "To whoever is reading this," the letter began. I held my breath, feeling a warm, yearning anticipation ignite deep under my ribs, as if I was about to hear a voice breaking through from the other side of time. "You bought my car and were curious enough to follow the GPS address to nowhere. That tells me something about you. You are searching." I read these lines aloud, and my voice trembled like a child's. Alves sat beside me, not looking at me, and only his hands, folded on his knees, seemed motionless, like stones. "Maybe you don't know what you're searching for," Nestor continued, "but you are looking. I am dying as I write this. I am 32, and I probably have a month left." I felt the words burning the air, reality becoming thinner, almost transparent. With each line, I seemed to hear the breath of a young man hurrying to say the main thing, what is usually said too late. "Life," he wrote, "is not about calculating everything, not about perfect plans or precise understanding of where you're going. The main thing is curiosity, to follow what touches your heart, even if it seems meaningless, to say yes to small impulses." I read, and something long asleep, a forgotten feeling opened up inside me, as if he was speaking not to me, but through me, to everyone who had ever choked on their own caution. "You drove 2 hours to see where an address you could have just deleted would lead. That is life." I closed my eyes for a moment. Roads, mountain turns, that very moment when I almost turned back but drove on anyway, not knowing why, flashed before my inner eye. Now I knew. "My father," Nestor continued, "is probably with you now. He is grieving. Losing a child is unnatural. It empties you, even if the child is an adult. He is one of the kindest people I have known. Talk to him. Let him tell you about our adventures. Let him share what he has learned." I looked at Alves. He sat motionless, but his eyes were wet, and the sunset sky was reflected in them, as if remnants of light floated there too. I turned back to the letter. "And then set off on your own adventures. They don't have to be big or meaningful to others. They just need to spark curiosity, make you feel alive, make you want to see what happens next." Tears rose in my throat, but I kept reading. I spent 10 years traveling the world as a photographer, and it was incredible. But the most precious memories aren't the shots or the countries. They are the moments when I sat next to my father on the bench, silent, watching the sunset. Those quiet minutes when we talked about everything and nothing, when time seemed to stop existing. The wind gently touched the letter, as if confirming, yes, all this was true. Now you are connected to me, stranger, he wrote further. You are completing the journey I didn't have time to finish. You are sitting in the place I loved most, with the person most dear to me, watching the sunset I would have liked to see one more time. Thank you for that. Thank you for your curiosity, for not deleting the address when you could. Don't wait until you die to understand. The meaning of life is simply to live. I read these words aloud, and at that moment everything inside me seemed to stop. Follow curiosity, Nestor whispered. Say yes. Don't worry about whether it's the right path. There is no right path. There is only the path you take and the attention with which you live it. The last lines were uneven, almost illegible. Take care of yourself and my father. He needs people around him who understand this. Life is short, and connections matter. Thank you for coming. Nestor Mangano. I folded the letter and couldn't raise my eyes for a long time. Everything around seemed to dissolve. The sound of the wind, a distant bird's cry, even Alvis's breathing, and only these words remained, saturated with the warmth of a man I had never known, but who spoke as if he had known me all my life. I cried quietly, without sobs, feeling the weight accumulated over years of silent despair, leaving with the tears. Alvis was crying too. We sat side by side on the old wooden bench in the fading light, and it seemed as if the sky itself was mourning and comforting us simultaneously. Two strangers connected by a dead man's letter, sharing one silence. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than emptiness, as if someone had finally seen me, not the exterior, not the role, but my very essence. I thought that maybe my curiosity, that impulse that made me follow a random GPS address one day, wasn't foolish at all. Maybe that was what Nestor called a way of life. When we walked to our cars in the dark, Alvis asked quietly, almost in a whisper, "Will you come back?" I answered immediately without thinking, "Yes, if you don't mind." He smiled, for the first time that evening, sincerely, with warmth. More than don't mind. I've been coming here every Saturday sitting alone with my grief, and now I have someone to share it with. So I came back the next Saturday, and the next, and the one after, as if an inner force, inexplicable, was pulling me to this place where the air smelled of pine and stone, where mountains framed the sky, and the evening sun painted everything in colors of consolation. Alvis and I gradually developed a quiet, special friendship, not intrusive, not requiring constant words, but filled with mutual understanding, rare and genuine. He told me stories about Nestor, about his travels, his crazy deeds, about photos that reflected not technique but soul, about a philosophy born not from books but from the road, from encounters, from losses and joys accumulated over a short but bright life. His stories held a tenderness undimmed by time and a pain that hadn't lost its power. I listened, and in every word I found an echo, as if someone had already lived the courage I once didn't dare to possess. I told Alvis about my weeks, about the little things that previously seemed insignificant but now filled with meaning. How I took a new road home just because it looked beautiful. How I lingered by a bookstore window because the sunlight fell beautifully on the glass. How I caught myself thinking I wanted to study again just for the pleasure of it. Once, 2 months after our first meeting, I confessed, "I'm thinking of signing up for a photography course. Not sure if I'll be any good, but I'm interested." Alvis smiled, that same smile with no trace of pity, only warm approval. "Then do it," he said. "Don't think about how good you'll be. Just follow the curiosity. It knows the way better than we do." So I did. I signed up for beginner courses at the community college. It was a modest endeavor. A few old cameras, a warm classroom smelling of coffee and textbook dust, and a dozen people like me trying to capture light and meaning. I enjoyed peering into details, how the sky reflected in a puddle, how a sunbeam touched a passerby's face, how the fragile world is composed of moments. I quickly realized I didn't have Nestor's talent, but it didn't matter. I felt the living pleasure of the process itself, and that was enough. 4 months after the day I first met Alves, I quit the call center. The decision was both terrifying and liberating. The paycheck was gone, and with it, the illusion of stability. But in its place came something greater, a sense of breath. I got a job at a small bookstore on the corner of an old street, where it smelled of paper, wood, and quiet human presence. There was no stress, just leisurely conversations, the rustle of pages, and a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. One weekday, a woman came in, tall, blonde, with an attentive gaze. She was looking for a book on photography, one we had recently received. I happened to be holding it in my hands. "This is an amazing book," I said without even thinking. "If you're interested in landscape photography, its approach to light will change your perspective." She looked at me in surprise and smiled. "Are you a photographer?" she asked. "A photography student," I replied, laughing. "A complete beginner, but obsessed." So we got talking. Her name was Vanessa. She was a graphic designer studying traditional photography to understand how to convey mood in her work. We talked for about 20 minutes about light, composition, how sometimes it's important to let chance intervene in the process. Before leaving, she asked if I knew any good places nearby for shooting landscapes. "Actually, I do," I said after a short pause, remembering the overlook, "but it's a special place." I didn't invite her right away. It seemed too personal. But Vanessa kept coming back, every Thursday, always with a smile, always with a book in her hands, always wanting to talk. A few weeks passed before I ventured. "Would you like to see that place I mentioned?" I asked when she came into the shop again. "Maybe on Sunday. On Saturdays, I'm usually there with a friend." She nodded, understanding without explanation. Our first joint visit to the overlook happened 3 months after we met. We went up there in the soft evening light, and I told her everything about Nestor, about Alves, about the letter, about that strange address that changed my life. Vanessa listened silently with moist eyes and then said, "Thank you for trusting me with this story. It's precious." Since then, we started dating, carefully, without rush, as if afraid to scare off a fragile balance. There were no loud declarations in our conversations, only a calm certainty that everything was happening as it should. Curiosity had done its work again, turned a chance meeting into the beginning of something real. 4 months after that, Alves came to my first student exhibition. I presented a series of shots taken from that very overlook, at different times of day and different weather, but always from the same bench. Alves stood before the photographs for a long time, and when he finally turned to me, his eyes were shining. "They are beautiful," he said quietly. "Nestor would have liked them. You didn't capture the landscape, you captured the breath of this place." I smiled, feeling my throat tighten with tenderness. "He taught me to follow curiosity," I replied, "and you taught me to value connections, because maybe that's the whole point of life." A year after that first Saturday, Alves and I were again sitting on our bench, the very one where my new life began, watching the sun slowly sink behind the mountain ridge, painting the clouds in deep, honeyed hues. The air was still, and it seemed even the wind dared not disturb this fragile silence, where the world's breath merged with ours. Alves was silent longer than usual, and I felt as if words were ripening within him that needed time to become sound. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but held the weight of memory. "I want to tell you something," he said, not looking at me. "When Nestor died, I didn't know how to go on living. The grief was so heavy that every morning seemed a feat, getting out of bed almost impossible. I came here every Saturday as if hoping the GPS would one day bring someone else who would understand, who would listen, who would give me a reason to stay. And then you appeared." He turned, and I saw in his eyes not pain but light, the kind that comes after long darkness. "All these months I've watched you search for yourself, learn to look at the world not with eyes of fear but with eyes of interest. I shared stories with you because I needed to remember. You gave me the chance to grieve and yet live. You completed Nestor's journey, yes, but you also saved me." I couldn't hold back tears. "You saved me too," I replied, "because I was drowning too, in emptiness, in aimlessness, in a meaningless race." Nestor's letter, your friendship, this place, all of it gave me back my breath, reminded me that life doesn't have to be understood to be lived. It can be just curiosity, just a willingness to open up. We fell silent. Before us, the sunset spilled across the sky in colors that, according to Alves, Nestor had particularly loved, and in that silence, there were more words than in any conversation. 2 years had passed since I bought that used car. My life now seemed different, not perfectly arranged, but real. I was still studying photography in my 2nd year now, still working at the bookstore, but now as an assistant manager. And every Saturday I still came here, to Alves, though now there were 3 of us, me, him, and Vanessa. The 3 of us sat on the bench, watched the sunsets, and time seemed to slow down, yielding to a silence where nothing needed to be explained. Alves told his stories, and I held Vanessa's hand, feeling how this simple gesture filled the world with meaning. Last month, Alves met her parents. After dinner, he quietly said to me, "She suits you. Nestor would approve. She makes you braver." I just smiled because I knew. He was right. Vanessa had become a mirror for me, reflecting not only love but also courage. She pushed me to take risks, to believe, to submit photos to competitions, to accept that failures are also steps forward. Last week, one of my photos took 3rd place in a regional competition, a shot of the sunset at our overlook, where Alves sat in profile, and the sun made his silhouette a quiet icon of memory. When I told him, he laughed like a child, and his eyes sparkled with joy, almost paternal. "You are living," he said, and that's what Nestor wanted, for someone to take his letter seriously, for someone to hear. I often think that I still haven't figured out many things. I don't know if photography will become my profession or remain a passion forever. I don't know if Vanessa and I will get married. I don't know where life will turn in 5 years. But maybe that's the point. Not to know and still go. Maybe happiness isn't in plans, but in trust. In allowing curiosity to lead, however strange the path may seem, because it was curiosity that led me here, to this place, to this bench, to a man who became family, and to a woman who inspires me to be braver. I bought a car with someone else's GPS address and got not a route but a life, a home without walls, a mentor who became a friend, and a love without fear. And now I understand, Nestor Mangano was right. The meaning of life isn't about finding the answer. It's about asking questions and not being afraid to follow them. Curiosity is the breath itself. It leads someone to a mountain landscape, someone to a conversation in a bookstore, and someone to a love they hadn't dared to dream of before. And to be honest, I can no longer imagine life without it.